Hi, thanks for tuning in. Welcome to Some Soothings. This is Season 2, Episode 6. My name's Joshua. I'm a musician and glitch and sound artist, and Some Soothings is a 30-minute weekly live stream in which I'll share and discuss art and poetry and music. There'll be some history, some jokes. It'll be very earnest, and there will be like a section of live improvised music kind of toward the tail end of the show. This is an outlet. This is a place for me to, work out ideas and hopefully, albeit screen-mediated, connect a little bit with y'all, commune somehow through the pixels. We endeavor to be really peaceful, vulnerable, calming if possible, but we're taking a really broad definition of the word soothing, and we'll not be ignoring any of the seriousnesses of our contemporary moment. So, welcome. Thank you for tuning in. Some quick housekeeping. Instagram Live has proven to be a fairly unstable platform, but I am recording and archiving everything as we go. So if the stream gets weird tonight, I will just post this to IGTV. So it'll be there by the end of the evening if for some reason something goes sideways. If you want to learn more about anything that we talk about on the show, there is an info doc that is linked in the pinned comment below. I can't really clock the comments as we're going, but I am recording them. I'm doing a screen record thing, so I will check them out with pleasure later this evening when I'm drinking my evening glass of panda tears, and I will respond to any questions or concerns that folks have at the top of next week's show. So speaking of which, we did get a really thoughtful note this week, asking in a really non-confrontational and very cool way about the way that we use pronouns for other people, the people that we feature on our show. So our current policy, let me try to explain this. So our current policy is to make no assumptions about a person's preferred pronouns. So if we can find evidence, actual evidence that a person uses or prefers he or she or they, then we'll follow suit. That's what we'll use. But in the absence of evidence, we're defaulting to they and their. So last week, for example, in our research, Martha Rosler was often referred to as she in articles and in text, but we could find no evidence of Rosler referring to themselves as she, nor could we find a moment in which Rosler explicitly states their preferred pronoun. So we used they. On the other hand, Muhammad Ali often, delightfully, refers to himself in the third person as he, so we followed suit there and called him he. My own preferred pronouns are he, they, meaning that I'm happy to be referred to as either, whatever feels best to whomever is speaking or kind of the circumstance that we find ourselves in. So I do want to note that I am not advocating for universal they. That feels too restrictive and also feels like it can be really dismissive of those who do prefer a gendered pronoun, who pridefully, for example, prefer a gendered pronoun. So I'm not prescribing a tactic here. I'm just trying to do better about not assuming other people's pronouns. I think also just habituating the singular they them in my own mouth. It takes practice, and I want it to come really easily when I'm with folks that have that preference. So that is our pronoun policy. I'm super open to critique of this policy and changing it, so if it's something that you've been thinking about, holler at me if you have any feedback at all. I am very interested in other folks' thoughts. And thanks for asking, Instagram friend. I just realized I forgot to ask whether I can share your name on the show, so I'm not going to, but Instagram friend, thank you for asking, and for being so generous-hearted in your query. Okay, let's get into the show. Let's look at some art. So this is Pitch. This is an installation by Allison Janae Hamilton. Hamilton was born in 1984 in Kentucky and then raised in both Florida and also at her maternal family's homestead in West Tennessee. Hamilton generally lives and works in New York City, but I think that she's quarantining in the South during these COVID times. Hamilton trained at Florida State, Columbia and NYU, has shown at MoMA, the Studio Museum, PS1, the Smithsonian, the Jewish Museum, the Whitney. I saw this show at MassMoCA, the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art. It's a really wonderful place. When it makes sense for us to go to museums again, let's all go to MassMoCA. It's a really special contemporary art space in Western Mass. This show was totally amazing. It was 3 or 4 rooms of work. It was tucked away up a small staircase, and you could smell the show in a good way before you saw it. The main room had all of these pine tree trunks, and you could smell the pine tar. You could smell the pitch as you came in. It was remarkable. This work is an installation. There wasn't wall text on any individual work. It was intended to be experienced kind of as a whole. There are paintings on plywood, there's multi-channel video, there's sound piped in, there's photographs. Then there's these objects, these spears and masks and fabrics. Hopefully the slideshow here gives you a sense of the range of kind of materials and gestures that are going on. It's a profoundly vibey, it's a really moody and really intriguing work. It engulfs, it feels human. It's strange and dangerous. It evokes that Gothic, that very rural Southern Gothic. It layers and composites different materials and sounds and imageries in this really deft way. I love this piece. There's all this narrative gesture in it too. The gods and monsters and mysteries of the Southern Swamp are a conglomerate, are a composite too. There are layers of African myth and Native American spirituality and Christian legend. And then, in this work, all of that's packed into this work, and then that's grafted onto Hamilton's own personal history. A lot of these materials are sourced from her family's land, which seems so remarkable and cool. And so that's another layer, and then there's a layer of the actual history of the objects themselves, these trees, getting these trees. There's a narrative in the materiality itself. And so then Hamilton goes and shapes all of it into this installation of these quasi-artifacts. I read the work as a kind of immersive, speculative, folkloric anthropology, which is a horrible sentence. I'm so sorry. That's just a tangle of syllables and ideas. But let's talk through it, and hopefully we can get to a place where that sort of makes sense. So let's work backwards. So immersive, speculative, folkloric anthropology. So the anthropology. So I'm thinking specifically of museum exhibitions of other cultures, arrowheads and vitrines and dioramas. The work here, I feel echoes that. It's presented as a kind of archaeology, and it employs some of these museum-ish conceits. These masks and tools are on display and weapons are on display, but then we also see photographs of them being worn or being used, and so it gives this historical or pseudo-documentary feel. Makes the objects feel like relics, and the presentation has this kind of museum of natural history vibe. So that's the anthropology part. And I guess also some of the speculative part, right? Because these are objects that Hamilton made herself, and makes really specific choices to evoke the sense that they are some other people's artifacts. Concurrently, Hamilton is constructing a folklore, an implied folklore. I don't know, let's get there. When we're in the Natural History Museum and we see an unfamiliar symbol on a dusty shard of pottery, we assume that it means something. We may not understand it ourselves, but we believe that someone does, or someone did. And so here in Pitch, when we see shared symbols on different objects across the work, and we see reoccurring phrases and resonant imagery, it encourages us to believe or to imagine that there's a mythic or a folklore that underpins it. But of course, like, that mythic is Hamilton's construct also. I couldn't find any evidence of any peoples that worshipped the like Ouroboros alligators. The Ouroboros is the snake that eats its own tail. So I think that this is just like a construct. These ones coming up right over here. Those alligators eating their tail. Those Ouroboros gators. That's like an imagined mythology. That's a construct that implies an imagined mythology. So the objects are doing kind of fiction making. The symbols on the objects are adding another layer to that world building. So I think that we can read Pitch as like a fictional exhibition of an imagined people and their imagined myths. And it smells amazing. So, immersive, speculative, folkloric anthropology. So I think we sort of did it, right? One last thought here that is likely far more useful than kind of any of that chatter. Afrofuturism is a term that we use to describe like a just and black-centered possible future. And I feel like with Pitch, Hamilton is creating a just and black-centered possible past. I loved this show. And in general, I think that Hamilton is doing just like really, really brilliant and really compelling work. And also is active on Instagram. So in our doc, there's a link to Hamilton's Instagram account. Definitely follow her. Very cool artist, doing very, very compelling work. All right. Okay. Up next on the show, we have a new segment. This is called Ask Yourself. A few weeks ago, I wrote up a bunch of, sort of probing questions. And then I wrote up a little piece of code that randomizes them. So I'm going to ask myself the question. I don't know what it's going to be until I hit this button. And I'll answer it. And then, if you so desire, you can, hold it as a prompt for yourself as well. Okay, let's see what we get. Ooh, kind of a softball. I'm pleased because I had a couple heavy ones these past 2 weeks. Okay, let's do it. Hey, buddy, are you minding your hygiene? Yeah, buddy, I totally am. It's going actually really well. I'm showering probably 6 days a week. We have fallen into the habit of, playing basketball or taking bike rides almost every day and then just showering when we get back. So, keeping pretty clean, keeping the mustache fairly trimmed and shaved here, giving ourselves, underwhelming but effective haircuts. Hygiene in general is going well. I don't know if this counts or not, but I definitely want to see a dentist soon. Is that hygiene? I guess it's maybe hygiene. Anyway, COVID, and I am a little worried about seeing the dentist, although I guess they must be taking like serious precautions, so I need to stop worrying about that and just see the dentist. But point being, like a couple weeks ago, I was eating a carrot and something that I imagine is really important came out of one of my teeth. And so I need to get that thing looked at and put back in. It doesn't hurt yet, but I'll bet it's going to. So, I don't know, maybe I'm B for hygiene? Yeah, you look like a B. Okay. Up next we have Radical History Snacks, in which we either feature cool old food, or we highlight a potent moment in the people's history. We're actually doing food this week. I think I may have found a way into the segment that does not require research on sperm whale vomit ice cream. I think what we can do is just look at a food that we still eat, one that's not super gross, and then kind of trace back its lineage. So today we're going to do a really brief history of gumbo. It's a 300 plus year old dish originating in Louisiana. Gumbo, at its simplest and probably least poetical, is just stew with rice. But its various forms, its spicings, its bases, its lineages, that's kind of where the poetry comes in. It has an anthropology and reflects kind of the melting pot nature of New Orleans and Louisiana culture. Unpacking how diverse cuisines collide into new flavors and traditions, I think is like so interesting and really lovely and pleasurable. But there's also some historical context here that we need to, bear the weight of at least a little bit. This all happens because of the transatlantic slave trade. Writer Nikisha Williams refers to this kind of culinary intertwining as, quote, forced fusion, which feels like a really, pretty powerful and pretty interesting kind of term. So let's keep this idea of forced fusion. Let's hold that and remind ourselves of that subtext as we kind of talk through this. Food historians generally agree that the name for gumbo originates in West Africa. The word kina gumbo means okra, and in the Bantu dialect. And okra stews with rice were a frequent food of enslaved Africans in Louisiana. And that, continues to be like a real base, like the okra as thickening agent is a base in gumbo that still is today. An additional feature of gumbo is the use of filet, which is a spice that's dried. It's made of dried and ground sassafras leaves. Food historians suspect this addition was contributed by the Choctaws, which is a Native American peoples indigenous to the Mississippi River Delta, and then along the Gulf Coast there. The Choctaw word for sassafras is kumbo, so there's like some consonants going on there that I think probably contributes to that intertwine. And then the final component of a good gumbo is roux. Roux is simply flour that's slow browned in fat, butter, or oil. Our first record of roux is in a French cookbook from the 14th century. And of course the French conquered and colonized this region around the Mississippi River Delta, and further expanding into the Americas in the 17th century. And so they've left a really long sociocultural impact on the region. And so of these three lineages, of the three provenances, comes gumbo, which in its contemporary incarnation ranges. Seafood-based, bean-based, chicken-based, sausage-based, okra-based, cauliflower-based. It is a melting pot that I suppose is both figurative and literal. I wish I could take that sentence back. It's dumb. Okay, scratch that. Point is, I don't have any idea. I've never had gumbo. I know, right? That's a problem. So I found a vegan recipe while I was researching this bit, and I am going to try to make some really soon. So I will keep you posted on how my gumbo goes. I will take really attractive photographs of it, and sometime in the next, probably, it won't be this week, I don't think, so probably in the next 2 weeks, I will share badly made, tasteless, vegan gumbo. Up next we have our Some Soothing special feature. Today our special feature is Let's Saw to Ska, and it features the music of Suff-X.
Now with these blowers, we're complete.
So each week on Some Soothings, we take a brief look at an organization or like an organizer that's doing work that we really admire. I will have already kind of researched and also already donated to this organization. And in sharing it with y'all, I'm encouraging, consider donating. The National Black Food and Justice Alliance is doing super critical work around race, land use, stewardship, nutrition, and food systems, and also have an incredible logo. Look at that logo. That is the coolest. Okay, in their own words, quote, "The National Black Food and Justice Alliance is a coalition of Black-led organizations working toward cultivating and advancing Black leadership, building Black self-determination, Black institution building, and organizing for food sovereignty, land, and justice. The Alliance seeks to achieve this by engaging in broad-based coalition organizing for Black food and land, increasing visibility of Black-led narratives and work, advancing Black-led visions for just and sustainable communities, and building capacity for self-determination within our local, national, and international food systems and land rights work. We focus our work on Black food sovereignty, self-determining food economies, and land. We approach this through the lens of healing, organizing, and resistance against anti-Blackness." So these cats are doing really cool stuff. Link is in the pinned comments. I specifically donated to the, what was it called? It's called the Black Land and Power Fund. So when you go to their site, in the top navigation, there's a section for the Black Land and Power Fund, which seems really interesting. So I threw a little bit of money at that. And if you have any despair and are interested, I would encourage you to do so as well. Cool. Okay, gang, let's play some music. Boy, I just am such a chatterbox. We have time for about maybe 4 minutes of some kind of droney-ish. I think it's going to be a droney-ish electronic stuff tonight. Okay, give me a sec to turn some knobs and we'll get that going. right, buddies. Thanks for listening. Okay, before we go on our way tonight, I do want to pause for a moment and just hold space and hold a moment of silence for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. May her memory be a blessing. Okay. Let's close with a poem. Tonight our poem is They Feed, They Lion by Philip Levine. I often find myself kind of feeling reticent to tell y'all how to hear a poem or read a poem, but I also feel like context can be useful and helpful. So in this case, just really quick, the Great Migration begins at approximately the turn of the 20th century, from the 19th to the 20th century, and it continues through approximately the 1960s. And the Great Migration is the movement of 6 million black folk. These are generally first and second generation from freed slavery, and it's the movement from the rural South to the urban Northeast, Midwest, and West. Racism, right? Segregation laws, Jim Crow, lack of opportunities brings a lot of black folk north during that time. So that's kind of a backdrop of the poem. I think Levine draws imagery from kind of both endpoints of that journey, the field of the South and the factory of the North, and then layers into that fragments from kind of the broader bookends of time around this Emancipation Proclamation to the Civil Rights Movement. In Levine's words, quote, "The poem grew out of my return to Detroit City where I grew up after the riots of 1967. They were called the race riots in the press. They were called the Great Rebellion in the city itself. As I went back to the city, I discovered, in the language of the time, that I was part of the problem, not part of the solution. I was now middle-aged, middle class, and I was white. And I was, to some degrees, just overwhelmed." So this is They Feed, They Lion by Philip Levine. Out of burlap sacks, out of bearing butter, out of black bean and wet slate bread, out of the acids of rage, the candor of tar, out of creosote, gasoline, drive shafts, wooden dollies, they lie and grow. Out of the gray hills of industrial barns, out of rain, out of bus ride, West Virginia to kiss my ass, out of buried aunties, mothers hardened like pounded stumps, out of stumps, out of the bones need to sharpen and the muscles to stretch, they lie and grow. Earth is eating trees, fence posts, gutted cars. Earth is calling in her little ones. Come here, come home, from pig balls, from the ferocity of pig driven to holiness, from the furred ear to the full jowl, come the repose of the hung belly. From the purpose they lie and grow. From the sweet glues of the trotters come the sweet kinks of the fist. From the full flower of the hams, the thorax of caves. From bow down, come rise up. Come they lion from the reeds of shovels, the grained arm that pulls the hands, they lie and grow. From my 5 arms and all my hands, from all my white sins forgiven, they feed. From my car passing under the stars, they lion. From my children inherent, from the oak turned to a wall, they lion. From the sack, and they belly opened, and all that was hidden, burning on the oil-stained earth, they feed, they lion, and he comes. All right, buddies, a little bit of spell casting from Philip Levine, huh? It's good. I miss y'all. Hope that you're keeping well out there in the world. We'll be back here next week. In the meantime, take good care of yourselves. Take good care of each other. I appreciate you. Good night.